Good afternoon, guys. For today's A, for discussion A for today, we are exploring the effects of confined environments on mind and mood. Okay, so that is what we're discussing. The second title for today's presentation: The world shrinks long before the walls do. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. And like I always say, if somebody has comments about the topic or wants me to uh, do another spin on this, let me know in the comments below, and I will see what I can do about doing another show for you. With that being said, let's get going. Okay? Okay, here we go. Long form, deeply developed essay, expansive, narrative rich, and grounded in psychology, neurology, and lived experience. The world shrinks long before the walls do. Confinement rarely announces itself. It begins quietly with a narrowing of movement, a restriction in sensory variety, a schedule that replaces spontaneity, a hospital room, a long-term care facility, a behavioral health unit, a submarine, a spacecraft, even a small apartment. During a pandemic, each becomes a micro environment where the mind must renegotiate its relationship with space, time, and autonomy. Humans evolved in environments full of novelty, shifting weather, varied terrain, expectations. The result is not simply boredom or loneliness. It is a measurable shift. Cognition, mood, and neurology, neurobiology. The cognitive landscape of confinement. Give me 1 second, folks. Monotony and the drift of attention. The brain thrives on variety, sensory input. When the environment becomes repetitive, the same ceiling tiles, same hallway sounds, same routines, the attentional networks begin to dull. People describe a soft haze settling over their thoughts. Processing slows. Focus becomes fragile. In long term care, it looks like flat days, where residents seem mentally distant. In hospitals, it resembles cognitive drift in spaceflight. Astronauts call it cognitive dulling. The mechanism is simple. Without novelty, the brain conserves energy by reducing engagement. Episodic memory depends on variation. When days look identical, the hippocampus struggles to encode distinct. They lose track of weeks of the week. This is not a failure of will. It is biology responding to the sameness. Executive function under constraint. Decision making becomes harder when choices shrink. Confinement reduces opportunities for intuitive, and the brain's executive networks weaken. People stop initiating activities, not because they lack interest, but because the environment erodes. Cognitive scaffolding that supports motivation. The emotional weather inside irritability and emotional voluntary validity. Small frustrations loom in large confined spaces. A late meal, a loud roommate, a missed activity. These minor events can trigger outsized emotional reactions because the environment offers few outlets for stress discharge. Anxiety and absence of autonomy. When people cannot choose when to go outside, when to sleep, or when to bathe, the amygdala becomes more reactive. Anxiety grows in places where autonomy shrinks. ICU patients often develop hypervigilance, paranoia. Residents in long term care may feel watched or judged, even when no threat exists. Depressive, depressive drift. Depression in confinement often arrives not as a sadness, but as flattening pressure, diminishes motivation, wanes the absence of novelty dampens dopamine pathways, making it harder to feel engaged. Okay, so when a person is confined long term, the emotions of people start coming out in anger, in frustration, in irritability because of being confined. It's like, for instance, if you take somebody with dementia and you put them behind closed doors without any and without a simple explanation as to why, for safety reasons, them being confined for long term works on the brain, works on people's minds. If you are in a closed area for very long, so getting places like mental health facilities, they have places called day rooms where folks can go do crafting for the day, or some type of activity, keeps their mind from focusing on why they are confined. People are confined for different reasons, be it because of mental health issues, or um something they break the law. Some people are confined for their own safety. Confinement used to be behind closed doors. Well, now you can close the door to the wing or the unit, and they have free space inside the unit. That means a lot to people. Having activities to do while you are in a confined space helps you break the boredom. Okay, so flattening pressure diminishes motivation, winds the absence of novelty, dampens dopamine pathways, making it harder to feel engaged. Sleep as a casualty. Circadian rhythms destabilize in environments with artificial lighting. Nighttime disruptions, nighttime interruptions, or irregular schedules. Poor sleep amplifies all other mood effects. The neurobiology of confinement. Confinement activates a predictable cascade. Cortisol raises, impairing memory and increasing emotional reactivity. Dopamine decreases, reducing motivation. Drops, weakening spatial and episodic memory. Difficulty, default mode network overactivity. increases rumination. In extreme confinement, solitary incarceration quarters. Confinement reshapes confine, confinement reshapes social dynamics. In small spaces, relationships intensify. Micro conflicts become magnified. Privacy becomes scarce. Staff turnover destabilizes emotional continuity, often knits people together in long-term care. The emotional climate of the unit of a unit becomes a collective phenomenon. A single staff member's communication style can influence the mood of the entire hallway. Now, guys, it's different. It's different for facilities because um of the way things are laid out in different places. Now, when somebody is confined in a nursing facility because of dementia, to break the boredom up, how you do that is you take 3 or 4 people at a time out for a small activity. Go for, like, if the facility has ice cream parlor, if you know a few of them like to get together for ice cream, or have that as a reward system. It's the same deal, to keep their mind from from losing focus. You want to make sure people still feel like people, even in confined spaces. Okay, let's finish the body's response to stillness. Confinement is not only psychological, it is physical. Limited movement accelerates deconditioning, muscles weaken, balance deteriorates, cardiovascular and endurance declines. But the physical effects also feedback into mood and cognition. A body that cannot move becomes a body that cannot regulate stress effectively. Movement is medicine, but confinement restricts it. Adaptation and resilience. Despite the challenges, human humans humans adapt. Across studies of astronauts, submariners, and patients recovering in hospital rooms, several protective factors consistently emerge. Structured routines stabilize cognition. Meaningful social contact buffers mood. Physical movement restores dopamine and reduces cortisol. All right, so back to explaining, in memory units. Um, they do that because of safety reasons. But when you have people that are confined in memory wings for dementia, you have the potential for aggression a lot. Like that is where resident to a resident aggression comes in. Some person could go off on somebody else. So be you have to be thinking of ways to keep these folks from having breakdowns. You have to keep them engaged, because the worst thing is being confined and not being able to communicate with people. That's the big thing for brains. That is why people go around in facilities and do check-ins on folks, because that's part of the human being for people. All right, so physical movement restores dopamine and reduces cortisol. Environmental enrichment. Plants, art, music, natural light improves emotional stability. Autonomy, preserving choices. Rebuild psychological agency. These strategies are powerful precisely because they counteract the core mechanisms of confinement. The large truth: confinement is not merely a physical condition, it is a psychological ecosystem. It shapes how people think, feel, sleep, remember, and relate. It influences clinical outcomes, emotional well being, and quality of life. And in health systems, it often invisible, hiding in plain sight. Behind schedules, room layouts, staffing patterns, and institutional routines. To understand confinement is to understand the mind under pressure. To address to to address confinement is to redesign care itself. Now, what that means is you make the unit look like a home bedroom or living room or open area, look more like home like instead of institutional. Um, exploring the effects of confinement environments on the mind and mood, a, pa- a palliative care lens, a long form narrative, analytic essay. that threads confinement through the lived experience of serious illness, caregiving, and the emotional architecture of palliative care. The room as a world. Now, we're gonna dig into how confinement is for palliative care folks at the end of life. Okay? So, here we go. In palliative care, the room becomes its own geography, a hospital bed, a recliner, a window that may or may not open. These are not just objects, but coordinates in a shrinking world. For patients with serious illness, confinement is not incidental. It is structural. It shapes how they think, feel, remember, and relate. It shapes how families grieve long before death arrives. And it shapes how clinicians understand suffering. Confinement is not simply a lack of movement, it is psychological ecosystem. The mind under pressure, the drift. Patients describe a soft haze settling over their thoughts. They lose track of time. They forget whether the chaplain visited yesterday or the day before. They struggle to follow conversations. This cognitive drift is not a sign of giving up. It is the predictable outcome of sensory deprivation. Disrupted sleep and the monotony of medical routines. In palliative care, we see this drift daily. A patient who once read novels now stares at the same page for an hour. A person who once managed a household now struggles to recall the date. The mind adapts to confinement by conserving energy, but the cost is clarity. The emotional weather. The emotional weather. The confinement amplifies emotion. Small frustrations loom. Large small frustrations loom large. A delayed medication, a loud roommate, a missed meal. These can trigger irritability or fears or tears. Families sometimes misinterpret this as a personality change, but it is environmental. psychological psychology, loss of autonomy heightens amygdala reactivity. Anxiety grows in places where control shrinks. Patients fear being forgotten. They fear being trapped. They fear the next interruption, even when the door is open. The mind can still feel closed in depression. Closed in. Depression arrives quietly, not always as sadness, but as flattening pressure, diminishes motivation, winds the just a second. I'll be right with you, folks. Absence of novelty dampens dopamine pathways, making it harder to feel engaged. The body's response. Serious illness already weakens the body. Confinement accelerates that decline. Muscles atrophy, balance deteriorates, cardiovascular endurance fades. But the physical effects also feed back into mood and cognition. A body that cannot move becomes a body that cannot regulate stress effectively. In palliative care, we see the consequences: increased fatigue, decreased appetite, worsening sleep, and a sense of heaviness that is both physical and external. The family experience. Families experience confinement too. They sit in chairs for hours watching monitors, waiting for an update, absorbing the emotional climate of the room. Their world shrinks to the size of the patient's bed. They lose track of time. They forget to eat. They feel helpless. Confinement shapes their grief. It compresses their emotions. It magnifies their fears. It intensifies their vigilance. They become attuned to every breath, every shift, every silence. Families often say, I feel like I'm living in this room. They are, and the room shapes them. The circadian experience. Palliative clinicians navigate confinement differently. They move between rooms, but the emotional architecture of confinement follows them. They witness cognitive drift, emotional um, validity, external fatigue. They see how the environment shapes suffering. Clinicians also feel the weight of confined spaces, the lack of natural light, the noise, the interruptions, the emotional compression. They carry the stories of patients whose worlds have shrunk. They become the bridge between the confined environment and the large world outside. The neurobiology beneath the experience. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on, folks. Confinement activates predictable cascade. Cortisol raises, impairing memory and increasing emotional reactivity. Dopamine decreases, reducing motivation and pleasure. Serotonin fluctuates, destabilizing mood. Hippocampal activity drops, weakening spatial and episodic memory. The default mode networks hum louder, increasing rumination. In palliative care, these changes can mimic delirium, depression, or external distress, but they are often environmental responses, not psychiatric disorders. The meaning of space at the end of life. Space becomes symbolic in palliative care. A window becomes a connection to the world. A hallway walk becomes a declaration of agency. A courtyard becomes a sanctuary. A chair pulled close to the bed becomes an act of love. Patients often ask for small things. Can you open the blinds? Can I sit by the window? Can I go outside for a few minutes? Can I leave the door open? Okay, guys. When somebody is experiencing the end of life, when they're confined to the bed because they can no longer move because of dying or serious illness, their world shrinks. So the small things matter to them. The small, the real small details. Those things really matter at the end of life. It's the same deal as if someone is confined to a jail cell or a memory wing for reasons that they cannot be by themselves. It's the same for a person at the end of life. What we try to do as end of life people is we try to give them as much dignity as we can, in reasonable ways, Small details really matter. That breaks the confinement that they're in. These requests are not trivial. They are attempts to reclaim autonomy, sensory input, and connection, attempts to resist the psychological compression of confinement. All right. Let's take a second here. Pull these back. Oh, shit. Okay, what palliative care teaches us about confinement? Palliative care reveals confinement's deepest truths. It's not just physical, it is emotional, cognitive, relational, and external, and it is modifiable. Light matters. Natural light stabilizes mood and cognition. Movement matters. Even brief ambulation restores dopamine and reduces anxiety. Autonomy matters. Choice when to bathe, when to eat, and when to rest reduces stress biomarker. Connection matters. Relational continuity buffers the emotional validity of confinement. Environment matters. Room design, not authentic. It is clinical. Meaning matters. Patients need more than a symptom control. They need environments that support identity, agency, and dignity. The large truth. Confinement shapes the experience of serious illness. It shapes how patients think, feel, and relate. It shapes how families grieve. It shapes how clinicians. Hold on 1 second. Understand suffering. And it shapes the emotional climate of care. To address confinement is to address suffering. To redesign environment is to redesign care. To understand confinement is to understand the mind under pressure at the end of life. Okay, so that is your B. I will be back on shortly with C. Give me a little bit for that, please, and I'll be back on with you. For now, Gator Wellness, take care, folks.